Entrepreneurship is hard. You wake up in the morning and no one cares that you even exist.
What are some other things that people are getting wrong about entrepreneurship?
I gotta be careful to not let this take the whole session today.
Rob Schoeben is an expert on storytelling and entrepreneurship.
There's 5 main points, what I call set the hook. And if you set the hook, you're good.
Whose career has spanned the likes of Apple and Microsoft.
This is the thing that a lot of people that come from large companies and go to do startups don't really get. But the lasting businesses that actually create multi-generational wealth and really change your life, they tend to be the whole game.
Rob, thanks for joining us today.
Yeah, my pleasure.
Your career has spanned corporate leadership, entrepreneurship, and most recently academia. But what's something from your earliest years you think that really shaped who you are sitting here today?
That's a great question. I'll go all the way back. So in my household, Saturday morning, there was always this thing called the list. I hated that damn list. In fact, I might even be in therapy about that list, if I'm being totally honest. But basically, my father had a set of chores that I had to do before I was able to have any fun, right? So go play with your friends. That's sort of what we did back in the day. Couldn't do anything until the list was done. And it wasn't clean your room, make your bed. It was vacuum the family room, the living room, clean the dishes, things that were for the household, right? So very early on in my head, I had rightly or wrongly impressed upon me that work hard, get stuff done for the greater good before you can take care of anything for yourself, right? So Midwestern culture, hardworking, that sort of beat that into me. By the time I'm 12, I'm mowing lawns and babysitting. By the time I'm 16, I'm at Burger King. I'm eventually at Aliota's Italian Villa cooking, veal spadini with my much older Italian chefs. Went to college. Parents were willing to pay for University of Wisconsin. I wanted to go to Duke, had to pay the difference. Work, study, 20 hours a week while I'm going to Duke. Work, right? So whatever that left me with more than anything was work hard and things will work out.
Throughout your career, I'm sure you've grown intimately familiar with the plethora of misconceptions that are out there about entrepreneurship. For example, raising venture capital being viewed as a success versus as a means to an end. Why is that the wrong way to think about raising money? And maybe what are some other things that people are getting wrong about entrepreneurship?
Okay, well, I got to be careful to not let this take the whole session today because I have a thing about pet peeves and in all aspects of my life, right? But one of them is, there's a set of them in entrepreneurship. So one is, so often we celebrate the round, right? So-and-so company raised $30 million. So-and-so, just the other day, OpenAI, right? $6 or $7 billion. It's hard to even comprehend. But when you start to focus on that as the achievement, you turn the VC into the customer. And your goals, and so those larger rounds are really kind of distorted. Let's talk about earlier. So you're in a startup, you're just trying to figure out product market fit, and you're trying to figure out how to acquire customers and how to satisfy them, how to make them happy. VCs come along and say, well, I need to see this metric, or I need to see this much ARR. Well, I'm not ready for ARR, right? I'm not ready, but I got to start pleasing them. And so now I'm trying to please them, and what am I not focused on? The customer, right? Which is the only thing that matters. My job as a startup is to learn, and to learn iteratively and to figure out, is there a business model here that works so that I can make a money machine that is worth investing in? And if I'm focused, especially too early, on achieving and pleasing the fundraising goal, then I'm not really on that path. So that's issue number one. Issue number two is, what percentage of startups do you think are funded by venture capital? Just give me a percentage.
10%.
Right. And if you probably hadn't taken some classes with me before, you probably would have said more than that. Because the media suggests that entrepreneurship, fundraising, that's what it's all about. But most startups, most companies don't want venture capital. They shouldn't have it. It's not a fit. And it's not bad, right? So the number is actually less than 1%. And part of the less than 1% is that some companies can't convince VCs to fund them. But more importantly, most of them aren't a good fit. I don't need, if I'm going to start a pizza joint, venture capital. Because what venture capital is about is funding a period of time where you prioritize growth over profitability. So what you're trying to do is say, all right, my source of revenue during this period of time temporarily will be this artificial influx of cash from venture capital so that I'm growing like crazy. Eventually, we're making crazy money, And if you don't have a business that has that curve, which is we're going to invest for some period of time so that we have a growth rocket ship, you shouldn't take it, right? Because also you're selling part of your company. And so once you do that, you realize that you are no longer completely in control, and your flexibility shrinks as well. I think even when I had you in my class, we had a guest speaker, the founder of Muscle Milk, and he talked about how he didn't realize till later, the day that he took, in his case it was private equity, he'd sold his company already because you're on the clock, right? Because people don't give you money because they think they just want to be involved in your life for the next 50 years. 7 to 10 years later, they're expecting an exit. And if that's not what you want or what you expect, that's not a fit either. So one, you got to make sure you're the kind of company with the kind of trajectory that should go get venture capital. And two is, it sure would be nice to not need it. But it is a means to an end. And so it plays a role for a certain kind of company in a certain kind of mode, but it also is not something that you should celebrate in and of itself. The last thing I'll say, and then we'll move on, is it can be wildly distracting to have too much money. And so when we were at Carbon, we launched at TED in 2015, went really well, kind of went viral, and our board took us aside and said, you know what, we really ought to raise, even though we don't need it right now, because you're hot, right? Everyone wants a piece of this company. Far more people than we'd ever sell to just thought it was the coolest thing and they just wanted it. And so we went out and we did a round. And we raised $100 million on a $1 billion valuation. And as leadership, our biggest fear was that we would stop being scrappy and nimble. And we would, instead of having beer bashes, we'd think about having champagne parties, right? You need to continue to feel like you can't make payroll. That's the best way to actually have the grit and the grind to refine and see where problems are and to fix them. If you have too much money, things don't look bad enough, and you ought to be able to see that.
I also think the real sort of impressive feat there is being able to launch a company of that size, being resourceful and bootstrapping. If anything, that's more impressive than being able to convince a bunch of people in Silicon Valley to throw money at you.
Again, there's a lot of ways to build a business. And there are some, I agree with you, right? So you bootstrap a business, it's great. But if you do have a business that needs a major investment to grow like crazy, to drown out all the competitive noise, and you bootstrap, that could be a mistake. The thing that is funny about bootstrapping is either the first thing you do or the only thing you do. Everyone bootstraps, at least for a minute, right? In the very, very, very beginning, you're bootstrapping. The question is, do you identify that you're the kind of business with the opportunity such that you need an infusion of capital beyond your means? It's okay. And again, bootstrapping is not good or bad, honestly. VC funding is not good or bad. Friends and family, many people do it, but it's kind of ironic, right? You think about one of the earliest sources of capital is friends and family. What did you learn when you were growing up? Don't borrow money from your friend or family, right? But as an entrepreneur, that's where you tend to have to go early on. And it's because people are betting on you, not yet your money machine, right? Because they don't know. It's too early. And so it's a tricky thing.
I think you gave an example, one of our previous conversations, where an entrepreneur had reached out to his family and friends, and one of his family and friends was Jimmy Buffett, and he lent him money, and he, for the longest time, didn't want to bring him the bad news to Jimmy that he had essentially, the company wasn't in operation anymore, and he didn't want to deliver the bad news. And when he finally did, Jimmy told him that he assumed the money was gone from the beginning because it is an investment in a person. And when you're doing these kind of angel rounds, it's more sort of a emotion and a gesture in the belief in someone.
Absolutely. And first, let me just give you feedback. It brings me great joy that you remember that story. And we'll probably at some point talk about storytelling and the power of storytelling. The fact that story stayed with you for all this time is fantastic. Jimmy, may he rest in peace. It was a very hard thing for that entrepreneur because he, for a period of time, as you said, didn't want to do the right thing because he wanted to make sure that he didn't screw over his investor. And the moment that Jimmy told him that, it was this light bulb that went off. And he realized that he had invested in him. He became a better person. He then went off to go to work at Bird, and he had a little bit of run for a while, and now he's doing something else. It's part of the journey. Different investors have different expectations. And so, like I said, when the founder of Muscle Milk realized that when he sold a portion of his company to a PE company, they just wanted the exit, right? They had a multiple in mind, a certain number of years out. Jimmy had a very different perspective. Your Aunt Diane has a different perspective. So all the different sources of funds, or your own credit card, right? There's a different way to think about it. So different ways. It's useful to understand what's their due diligence, right? What do you think Jimmy's due diligence was? Do you think he was really looking at this? It was actually a drone company and thinking about it critically. No, he's like, this kid. I believe in him. He was good friends with his mom, and for him it worked, and it was a good investment.
One of the other pet peeves that came to mind was this idea that pivoting is not failure. Can you talk to me a little bit about that?
Pivoting has become this word that somehow it's crept in the common vernacular in society. I mean, maybe it was from friends when they're moving the couch up the stairs and they keep saying pivot. But the idea is in entrepreneurship, like I said, it's a learning journey. And this is the thing that a lot of people that come from large companies and go to do startups don't really get. Is you work at a large company and you basically are there to play a role to keep the machine running because the machine works, right? You invest, you're at Apple as an example, and you are on the iPhone team, and you got to make sure that you keep the cost down, you know where you're going to sell it, you know what the kind of margins you're targeting for, and you just have to make sure you optimize it. When you're in a startup, you're just trying to figure it out. And you have this idea, and it turns out you start to talk to people, and it turns out maybe your idea is not that great. What do you do, right? So the whole process, if you get overly academic about it, so it's a hypothesis testing exercise where you're figuring out, is my guess about the business right? I think that this water would be very valuable because people relate to the Fiji Islands and they pay a premium, but that may be completely wrong. I might find that there's biases against Fiji, and people have thought that, maybe there's a perception that, yeah, it's a cool place to go, but the water's not very good. You got to learn all that. So if you start to have a hypothesis about your business, and you do the right thing, and you test it, and you find out you're wrong, the good entrepreneur will take a step back and say, okay, I'm wrong. Why do I care? I'm just trying to create value and to create something that is going to satisfy a set of customers. If this isn't it, I'll change it, right? And that might be that it's a small change, like, okay, we got to change the color of the bottle or something like that, or it might be a big change. Right? Some of your hypotheses are existential threats. Right? I have a theory that the government will allow me to do this. If you get into it and it turns out the government will not allow you to do that, and it would require 6 years of lobbying to have that change, the idiot would keep going. Right? So what you need to do is take a step back and say, all right, what was the core overall goal? Pull all the way back to that and say, is there another way to go? So maybe there's a way to do something that's different. Instead of being, a company that makes water, maybe I'll just find a way to distribute it, to communities that can't afford it, or whatever it may be, get into disaster relief. So the ability to react and adjust, it is actually the most important thing. So a lot of people, at least in the old days, would say, someone who pivots, that's just a version of failure, right? In a way, people talk about failure, is it good, is it bad? I think there's a lot of craziness out there about failure, almost like being a badge of honor. I think what it really is seeing these little micro failures or being wrong and adjusting. That's where success comes from. And if you talk to, and you probably will over the course of this podcast, talk to people who have had startups, most of them have pivoted tens of times, right, or dozens of times, because that's how it works. Pivoting and iterating. One of my favorite words is iteration, right? I have an idea, but I'm going to iterate. And if you give me feedback, that feedback's now mine. Right? One of the things that I used to talk about when we were together before is feedback is a gift. And so in the whole process, pivot is the reaction to feedback that says, I was wrong enough that I need to change a little bit more. But pivots are everything from slight adjustments, which you do every minute of every day as a startup, or just complete retrenchments and going in a different direction.
What percentage of businesses do you think that come to fruition lay out in the exact way that the founder had in mind from day one?
Zero.
They had zero.
Yeah. Thank you for the easiest question of the day. Zero. And even when you look at or you hear about, a lot of podcasts will talk about successful entrepreneurs tell their story. Every single one of them talks about how this was my idea. Or one of my favorites was the, what's the food delivery, grocery store shopping one? Instacart. I think that's his 23rd company, right? Wildly successful. The other 22, not so much, right? So are those pivots sort of kind of not, right? All of that learning from all that failure, That's one way to build up the set of resources and skills and insights to do something that is successful. Or other ones are just, slight variations on a theme, right? But none of them work out the way that they had planned. And the other thing that I really realized when I started teaching entrepreneurship was how foreign it is relative to traditional business. So I have gone in and out of entrepreneurship in my life, and not all that intentionally, quite honestly. But when you work at an established company, you have a goal, and you collect a set of resources to achieve that goal. That's super clear. It's how I think most people, their normal way of operating is, I gotta go do something. I'm gonna go on a vacation. I gotta make sure we have, a rental car, flights, place to stay, have a general sense of maybe going to restaurants, some other activities. I gotta plan all that out, but I know the goal. Or I'm gonna spend a week in Hawaii or whatever that is. With entrepreneurship, a lot of times it's not like that at all. It's the inverse, which is, okay, I've been working for 15 years. I've got all these skills. I got all these resources. I have this network. And I see a problem that drives me crazy that I think I'm uniquely qualified to do something about. I want to take what I know and who I know and go after this problem and see if I can and lick it. And along the way, if it turns out to be something over there or even over there, I'm okay with it because I'm just trying to use the resources I have to create some value for whatever motivates me, whether it's to pay my rent, to get, to just solve an ill in society, whatever motivates me. But I'm not bound to the goal, right? I'm bound to making something of my resources. And it's this inversion that for me was a light bulb that went off, is this effectuation, right? It's where the effect starts first. It's not causal where I know exactly what I want to do. I'm just going to figure out how to do it. I got a bunch of resources. I'm going to figure out what can I do with this. So a lot of entrepreneurs come out of some field where they have some deep expertise, and they just don't like how sort of the incumbents are doing things, and they see it slightly differently, and they say, I could do something about that. Those are my favorites, as opposed to, I'm just 21 years old, and entrepreneurship's cool, and I saw all these videos on the internet how I can make a ton of money quick, and I'll do anything. Drop shipping's awesome. I guess some people can make money doing stuff like that, but the ones that actually satisfy and think deeply satisfy, which goes more into human psychology than entrepreneurship, are the ones that are aligned with your core values and your mission. And I think those are the ones that usually work.
On that note, the last sort of misconception of entrepreneurship I want to touch on before I move on to storytelling is this idea that it's a great way to make a huge exit and make a lot of money and retire into the sunset. You mentioned the Instacart founder is on his 22nd venture. And I think, you hear a lot about Instacart, but you probably have to do a little bit of digging to find out what venture 4, 5, 6, or 12 were. And I think the average person would probably give up on this entrepreneurial journey after the second or third or fifth failure because they think they're just not fit for it. Tell me why starting a company for the purpose of making money is the wrong mindset.
Well, it turns out that there's a lot of easier ways to make some money, right? So people have figured out value creation machines that you can go work for, where they figured out, a level 54 employee is paid this amount of money, and you just show up and do your job and you can make some money. That's actually easier, right? Entrepreneurship is hard. You wake up in the morning and no one cares that you even exist. There is no automatic payment that you're going to receive. You have to make everything yourself, and you have to find a way to bring more money in than you spend. And everyone talks about and highlights the ones where people made it work and make it seem easy, or maybe are a little scammy, and push the ethical lines to some degree. But the lasting businesses that actually create multi-generational wealth and really change your life and whatever else, they tend to be more of a marathon than a sprint, a little bit of a trite analogy, but it just takes work, right? And we talk about the idea and the iteration and finding, if you're going to create a unique business that has value and it's defensible, it takes a lot of insight and learning to find a unique space. One of the things that drives me crazy is this. I think people talk about it a little less today because of the current generation. But when I was coming up in the tech world, a very common phrase was the deferred life plan, and it drove me crazy, right? Because the idea was, and I lived in Palo Alto, worked in Silicon Valley, And people would move from the Midwest. And they'd come out and their idea was they're going to work for 5 years, make a crap ton of money, and then they're going to go back to their family and they're going to live in the big house and do all this wonderful stuff. And they're just going to grind for a period of time, give up everything. And then when the IPO happens, they'll just take that money and go home, right? But you look at the statistics, most of the companies that you're going to join don't work out, right? So you are probably taking a below market salary. Well, certainly as a founder, you're taking a below market salary. If you're an early employee, you're taking a below market value because you've got this deal with the system that says that there is a probability of a huge amount of money. It's a low probability, but it exists. So if you multiply the low probability times the big number, it works. Problem is you can't eat off of that, right? You can't eat 5% of $1 billion or 0.5% of $1 billion. You can eat the paycheck. So the idea that I'm going to go do this because I'm going to give up my life and I'm going to do the startup thing because startups have this formula that says I'm going to make this crazy money. What if it doesn't work out, right? Now you have no friends, you have no family, you've ground for a bunch of time, you don't actually potentially know how to do a job that would be valued in a larger company. So it's this interesting trade-off. And so for me, I don't think it is worth saying that my way of being able to support myself is to go be an entrepreneur because I'm going to make money fast. Now, if you say that I want to build value myself and I want to be resourceful and I want to be the one that creates value and I want to be rewarded consistent with the value I create, great. As long as your expectations are aligned, right? So also, when you hear a lot of these successful startup stories, they talk about their lifestyle at the beginning, right? 20 guys in a house or 20 people in a house, finding a way to couch surf, eating ramen, all the things that people at least used to brag about. That's part of the game, right? That's not because I'm getting rich. It's because I'm trying to make something amazing. Now, that's not the press, though, right? So social media is bad for so many reasons, in my opinion. But one of them is it's just like you see people's vacation pics, you think their family's so happy, and then 3 weeks later you find out that they're getting a divorce. Same thing with entrepreneurship. So everyone talks about all this amazing stuff. Actually, sorry, I'm a little ADD right now, but one of my pet peeves is the people who sell get rich quick content. And you know how they get rich quick? By selling the content. That's it. They've never done anything, but because you buy into it. And so I think it would be helpful if people realized entrepreneurship is hard. It's great, not for everybody, but it is about something that you have to be patient. And I'm working with a variety of founders that are loving it. They're on their third or fourth failed. I mean, the businesses don't exist anymore. They learned a ton. They made some money and were able to support their family while they were doing it. But they haven't achieved the dream. And at some point, they may take a break and get a paycheck for a while. But, it's not a panacea. Get rich quick, despite YouTube and other channels. It's not even the small minority of cases. It's the outliers.
I think anyone listening to the podcast this far can tell that you're an expert storyteller, and I'm sure that didn't come immediately in your career. What are sort of some of the principles or frameworks that a listener can apply to improve their own storytelling techniques?
Yeah, well, it's an important question because in the last 20 years, the business plan is dead, right? Replacing the business plan is the pitch. And you go around any coffee shop in any community that's got a lot of entrepreneurs, everyone's got their computer open and they're pitching. And that's because that is the way you convince people to either fund your company, join your company, believe in your company, whatever that may be. And so the ability to persuade somebody is a fundamental skill, possibly the most important skill, or at least up there, for the founder. There's 5 main points that what I call set the hook. And if you set the hook, you're good, right? Like if you set the hook, you catch the fish. You may not know how to cook it, but you can find someone who can cook it. But setting the hook is everything, and if you don't, you're done. The first thing you do is you start with naming the enemy. And the enemy is not a competitor, right? The enemy is the one thing that stands between your target customer and eternal bliss and satisfaction and love and happiness. And what that says is I understand, I'm talking to you because there's a problem in the world that's just not okay. And it is something I'm going to paint a picture to you that you, by the time that I'm done with this step, in this 5-step process, you'll say, you know what? It's not okay that problem exists. I understand it. I feel it. It's emotionally evocative, and I'm almost even pissed off about it, right? So I could get you fired up. I'm not a 14-year-old girl, but I could get you fired up about the impact of social media on 14-year-old girls and their self-esteem and their belief in themselves, and what it does to their, body image and their eating habits and their loneliness and their depression and anxiety and all this stuff. I can do that. That's step one. I got to make sure that you're with me on that problem. You see, I don't want to hear about your team or the total available market or the background of all the things you've done. You haven't earned that right. You're here to convince me that we're going to go create a future that's worth creating. Got to do number one. Number two, tell me why now is the moment in time, and it is a little bit of corollary, why you're the person that is going to actually kill this Darth Vader that you've created. Right? Why are you in a best position to do that? Right? Is it the fact that there's broad-spread media coverage about the fact that social media is so dangerous for young girls? Is it the fact that you have data that shows that they're creating private Instagram channels to make sure that they keep the predators out and other things? Is it the fact that there's a government, hearings going on about this? Is there a fact that they're forcing rules changes and regulation to occur so that Meta has to put in place different regulations? All that stuff says that, something's going on, right? Problem really sucks. It's a problem. This isn't 5 years ago. This is now, and now feels like we're at the moment that we got to act. Right? And so now I got your head nodding again. Like, all right, problem's big enough. This feels like the moment in time. Now, paint a picture for me of how amazing the world's going to be when you do what you're going to do. So I don't want to hear about your product or how are you going to fundraise or whatever you're going to do. Just paint a picture of this world was bleak. This world is awesome. Right? And one of the things that I talk about, I picked up from the book Sapiens, was the realization that as human beings, we have the ability to have a fictive language. Neanderthals could only describe things. We could describe things that didn't yet exist. And that's what an entrepreneur does. One of Steve Jobs' gifts was the reality distortion field. Right? He could paint a picture that you felt like it was already real. That's what you've got to do. So this world for this 14-year-old girl is unacceptable. Paint a picture of how she's so much better off. And anxiety and depression go down, connections with her community go up, she's not on her phone maybe so much, and she's living life and other things. I want you to be nodding because I want that world. Right? So all I'm doing now is I'm setting the hook. We're not yet at the business. We've got a problem that's worth solving. This world that you paint sounds like it's a really good world. All right, now what? So now I have to say, all right, so what are you going to do to get me there, and what are the obstacles, right? Because if there weren't any obstacles, this would already be solved, presumably. And so proving that you're not just blowing hot air, but you've identified the obstacles, and the fact that you're the kind of guy or gal that busts through obstacles gives me great comfort. Because if you don't do that, I conclude one of three things. One, you're arrogant, right? It's beneath you to worry about the details. Mm-hmm. I don't want to think about all that. Number two, you're not paying attention, right? I need you to be deep into your business to understand there are going to be hard things. You understand what they are. You need to prove to me that you're the kind of person that can do it. So I don't have confidence in you if you don't do it. And the third is you might be right. If there are no obstacles, this is a crappy business. It means it's a commodity. Mm-hmm. Anyone can do this. It's easy. So I don't like you. I don't want to do business with you, or this is not financially wise. All three of those are bad. And so all of that gets me to a place that says, I want to work with you to solve that problem. And then you can lay out the actual solution and get me excited. So many people start out with, who am I? And let me show you my widget. You have no right to do that yet. I don't care, right? The last meeting, you're talking about 14-year-olds and impact of social media. My last meeting was about solar farms. Right? So you got to get me to a place where I understand, I'm connecting, I understand, I care, way before you can ask me to take some action. And so one of the things that is the last theme that I'll just say in that answer is care. Too many people are afraid to go to this emotional place of getting me to care. They think that my job is to get you to understand. I'm going to explain to you a bunch of facts. Let me talk to you about my PhD thesis. Let me talk to you about the process that we use to 3D printers and how air changes the rate at which the hardening occurs when you project light through a window. Yeah, that's important background. But the only reason that you want me to comprehend it is to get me to care, so then I can act. And so help me understand, get me to emotionally care, and then convince me that I should act. And buried in that first one is conceptualization. And I think a lot of skills that I think I've developed over the years and I try and help other people develop is find ways to help me understand, right? Because what people tend to do is they talk a lot and they want to say a bunch of stuff. But I like to say, it's kind of like this, or you ever think about this analogy? Or, it's sort of like in the mental health nonprofit agency space that we started a couple of times, we simplified the business to people very simply, which is if you have a kid and they break their arm at recess, you know exactly what to do. You take them to the doctor, they get an x-ray, they get a cast, they go back to class and they're famous. And people, at least in the old days, used to sign their name and they're cool. The kid comes home and says that they're not sure they want to live anymore and they're really anxious and they don't know who they are. As a parent, you're frozen, right? It's a completely different situation. So our goal as an agency was to make the broken arm no much easier, or say it the other way, that the anxious, suicidal ideation situation to be as readily acceptable and straightforward to solve as the broken arm. And so demystifying or destigmatizing mental health and making it the norm was the goal. And I think over the last 10 years, there's been a lot of progress along those lines, but it used to be completely stigmatized. But the idea of, okay, I can now think about the broken arm in my situation and I can relate to that was a way to help me conceptualize instead of all the statistics about mental health in America and blah, blah, blah. I can do that too. But immediately I can get to that place, right? And so people tend to not take the time to figure out how I can make it easy for you to understand, because that takes work.
Yeah.
And especially if you're going 1,000 miles an hour, people don't want to do that.
I'm imagining you giving this kind of pitch about carbon and talking about complex 3D printing. Do you have any other sort of examples of taking something complicated that the founder might be an expert in, breaking it down to something that a venture capitalist or an investor would be able to understand in sort of a more bite-sized way that gets them excited about it?
Well, let me just borrow one for a second. It's cheating a little bit, but if you remember when the iPhone first came out, and again, I'm borrowing from Steve, who was a great mentor in this regard because he was the best at this, and I literally felt like I was in a master class working for him in this context. But he came out and he basically just said the phone is just a combination of a few things, right? It's a web browser, it's the iPod essentially, and it's a communications device. And he just, in a cube, rotated these things around and said, a phone can be all of these things. Boiled it all down. 1,000 songs in your pocket, right? When the iPod came out, it was a portable music player. It was a computer with a 3.5-inch disk drive that rotated rapidly. It had software. It had an interface. It was a freaking computer. We're not allowed to ever refer to it as a computer. We're not ever allowed to talk about the specs or features. It was this magical device that put 1,000 songs in your pocket so that whenever you're out living your life, you can enjoy music. And so what it was a way to enjoy music wherever you are. And so it could have, it's funny because you take it for granted now, but the portable music players that existed at the time, from Creative Labs and other people, they were talking about MP3 formats and different bit rates and all this other stuff. Not the point. The point is you like music, I like music. You can imagine when you go to the gym, it would be nice to play your favorite music while you're there. On the bus, it'd be kind of nice to not be listening to that crazy person next to you squawk in your ear, but instead be listening to, your favorite Eminem song, whatever that may be.
So it sounds like leading with the value proposition, the tangible benefit to one's life that is achieved by doing this is...
Yeah, and if you think about the setting the hook, why is that? Because underneath that is that unacceptable pain that has been removed. So the benefit really is the thing that is the positive version of the bad. right? So it used to be that we would get CD-ROMs and we'd spend the weekend ripping them onto our computer, trying to figure out the right formats, going onto the internet and trying to download, I'm old, right? Download album art and then manually sync it to your iPod. And then all of a sudden, you have this ability with the iTunes Music Store that songs, you just hit a button and you buy them and they show up automatically on your iPod, now iPhone. That's the way it's got to be. But if you ever did it the other way, it's life-changing.
You mentioned Steve Jobs a little bit earlier, and I wanted to dig into that because you had the unique opportunity to work alongside of him at Apple in the early 2000s. So I was wondering if you could share a little bit about what that experience was like. And also, I think it was in around 2006, you had a pretty daunting task that was given to you by Steve. And I would love to kind of hear about that.
Yeah, I absolutely feel fortunate to have worked closely with him. I had come from Microsoft. And at Microsoft, my two CEOs were Bill Gates originally and then Steve Ballmer at the very, very tail end. Now all of a sudden I'm at Apple, and he's a product guy. And he's a product management person, a savant with respect to the consumer experience, things that are closer to what I aspire to do every day, or actually quite similar to the job that he's asking me to do every day. And so then one day we're in one of these Wednesday meetings, 10:30 on a Wednesday, early in 2005. I've been at the company for about 18 months. And topic comes up about NAB 2005, and we've got a bunch of really important server products, pro video products that we're going to be launching. And the head of communications talks to Steve about, is he ready? What was he going to do? So yeah, I'm not going. Rob's going to do it. Like, what? So part of me was excited. Part of me was mortified. And to be fair, a lot of the other people in the room were mostly mortified, right? Because, you're dropping down from Steve Jobs to me. And so, I'm a Microsoft guy still, in their eyes, and I'd never done this before. And so that was an interesting moment. And after a little bit of debate and discussion and artificial democracy, Steve said, shut up, he's doing it. And then he was very kind and said, hey, Rob, I know you haven't done this before. Let me give you some tips. And so it was going to be a 2-hour presentation. And it's like, make no mistake, I know you're reasonably good at communicating. 2 hours is hard. It's a long time. And so he walked me through sort of his secrets around how you need to start strong, and can be some boring stuff that you have to communicate, but you bury them in between, and you pace it all out and whatever else, and said, all right, at that point, just go for it. We're going to talk about other stuff. Because Steve was, at that point, really primarily interested in the consumer side of the business. It was becoming a consumer company. We had just dropped Computer. We went from Apple Computer to Apple Inc. And we were getting ready. We're on a path toward the iPhone. The iPod was really what he cared the most about, iPod and iTunes. And so this is pro apps, right? It's, complicated, detailed stuff. Mm-hmm. So anyhow, I went into that mode and said, all right, I've seen him do it. I've had to build slide for him for my products. So I actually know what to do. I just have not done it. And so I just went and did, how do I have the best facsimile of being him, right? So it meant that we drove the same kind of process. I had, the process that we had built for him for demo scripts, and how the demo script is micromanaged on every single click and every single word, and knowing every asset that you're going to get, and going out and getting some really great video footage and creating some videos, and all that stuff I knew how to do. I just had to do it. And it was about over-preparing. And one of the things that I'm proud of is that my team did an amazing job. And we did it then after that, right? That was the first time, and we kept doing it every year and did smaller things for pro audio as well. But it was about rehearsal and preparation and making sure that we knew that we had it. And I'll never forget, because we're working really hard, one of the events coordinators came up to me and said, Rob, I need to give you some feedback. I was like, oh, what is this going to be? She said, I've been watching you guys rehearse for the last 4 days. Your team rocks. You got this. Products are great. Messages are great. You're good. You just need to chill the hell out, right? And so I always had this routine where right before I had to present, I just needed to be alone a little bit. She said, no. This is Apple, right? Put on your headphones, pick out your favorite song, go for a walk, and just get out of your head because you know it, right? And the art, in my opinion, of doing a great presentation is you own the material, you know the material, but you don't have it memorized. And so I was on the verge of memorization. And she's like, nope, you're good. Stop. No more preparation. So I, at that point, adopted Eminem's Lose Yourself as my walk-up song. And kind of interesting, if you listen to the words, it's just perfect, right? Because you've done nothing to lose, put it all out there. And came back to it fresh and said, let's have fun, right? Because the last thing about presentations is, yeah, it's a lot of work, and yes, there's stress, and everyone talks about presentation anxiety, but at the end of the day, you're going to do what you're going to do, so you might as well enjoy yourself, right? We busted our ass for that presentation, all our presentations. We worked so hard. No one ever understands how hard, but you just want to celebrate. And so have fun. Because the other thing that you'll find, again, in human nature is if I'm not having fun, you're not having fun, right? And my audience, if I'm stressed out, you're stressed out for me, right? We're empathetic creatures. And so, I've been meaning to reach back out to her for years because that has been such transformative advice. Is, yes, you learned how to prepare, but also learn how to detach and go into joy mode, right?
Would you say that's how it felt when you actually got up on stage after you had your pump-up song after all the preparation? Did you have fun giving the presentation? Yeah.
I mean, you black out a little bit. But yeah, when it's all working, the danger is if you have any distractions, you can get lost. But if you're really there and you're really in it, absolutely, absolutely. And the other little piece of advice is, when you do know something that well, the only thing you have to make sure you nail is the first 5 words, right? Because that's where you get stuck. Is like, if you prepare everything, don't like nail the 2 hour and 15 minute mark. Nail the first minute. Because once you get going, your brain's got it, right? You've got it. You know the material, and even if you go in different places, you'll be okay. But if you can't start and you can't make that connection, everyone's tense. And so just make sure that you know how to start.
I want to pivot a little bit to a topic that I think is on a lot of people's minds, especially young people these days, which is work-life balance, and how does that play a role in their life, in their career? You mentioned when you were working at Ogilvy prior to Microsoft, prior to Apple, you guys were sometimes pulling all-nighters, working super hard, and the line between work and life was often being blurred. How do you think about did you think about work-life balance back then? And how do you think young people currently view work-life balance?
All young people are not the same. So I got to just be careful to not answer the question. I stereotype all y'all, because that's not fair.
Sure.
My story is, back then, I was in my 20s, and pouring everything I had into my job was positive. I had positive reinforcement from a professional standpoint, but I also had positive reinforcement from a personal standpoint. So work-life balance is not a term I love, because through time, you actually want to balance it across life, not across every day. And so in that period of time, I loved working with my team. They were some of my best friends, right? We were doing amazing work. We were growing like the business that was the agency team. We were growing that P&L while we were also solving problems for really cool technology companies at the same time. Loved it, right? I'm still in touch with a lot of those people. Those are the glory days to some degree. That was a choice. At the time, there was a culture of badge of honor, right? So it used to be you work like that as a badge of honor. You'd brag about the all-nighter. Thankfully, today, there's a little bit of a pushback on the system and the concept of work and what is it all about and everything else. I think there's a very healthy reimagining. That said, I will say that people who are aligned with the mission that they're doing and can pour themselves into that work and can find it gratifying, there's nothing wrong with working hard, right? And so what I'm concerned about is that there's this general pushback on the concept of work, and someone ought to just pay me a certain amount of money, and I'm entitled to a bunch of stuff. Remember my list, right? Yeah. Do your chores, and then you'll be rewarded. And maybe this is wrong for me, but I grew up feeling like I'm just going to bust my ass. I'm going to do incredible work, and people will reward me for it. And that happened in the corporate world. That happens in entrepreneurship. It might even be a little naive because I didn't necessarily push back or whatever else, but it worked out. Sometimes I see folks that just want to reject the fact that maybe they were watching me and they say, I don't want to be like that, right? But at the same time, I was the guy that was working at Apple, It's a lot of hard work. And I would say no to trips to Europe, or no, I can't travel. I need to be home with my family, right? And did that have a cost? Probably, but I was willing to take that, right? So everyone has their own ability to do that, but there's nothing wrong with working hard at something that you love. If you're just doing a job, you shouldn't. You should have total boundaries, right? If you're making certain number of dollars to do a task, you put it in a place because your real gratification lies elsewhere, great. It's not the same for everybody, right? So some people have jobs where the job is a huge part of their identity and a huge part of their satisfaction as a human being. Other people have jobs just so they can afford to go camping every weekend. Both are cool. But don't conflate the two, right? Don't come to an environment where we're all in this, we're mission aligned, and we're going to do some amazing work, and we're going to transform the world as we know it. That doesn't have the same kind of boundaries. So just match it, right? Just make sure that their situation, your ambition, and the rules and the guidelines that you put on it fit. And your answer is different than my answer. My answer today is different than my answer in my 20s. My sons are all different, and they have different answers amongst themselves, and they'll probably change over their lives. It's okay. But just don't have the misalignment. And that's what pisses off generations, is when you actually are in this situation, but you act like you're just punching the clock, right? Or, I have to back off. Like I go to a place where there are workers, and they're just punching the clock. Like I go to Home Depot, and I ask them, so where is the 3/4 inch drill? And they're like, I don't know. And they're done responding, I don't know. Like, I can't, that doesn't compute for me. But then I realized possibly, one, they should still do better, but it's just a job. Or if you go into a small business and you act like the employee has equity in the company. Well, they don't. They're just doing a job. And so who would you want to be, right? So if you want to be the guy that's going to transform, home renovation, and to grow this organization, that's one kind of work. If you want to maybe know where a 3/4 inch drill bit is, that's another kind of work. If you are at a stage of life where you've got 3 kids under 4, and that has a certain kind of boundaries. So like my son is at an AI startup and doing great, working his tail off, but he struggles a little bit because he's the only person in the company who has a family. Right? He's got a 1-year-old and another baby on the way. Everyone else, they don't need to go home. So, you got to ask yourself, so at this moment of time, what does work look like in my life? And, for you today, it'll be different than it is for you in 10 years.
If you think back to when you first started your career to where you are now and, the money you've earned, what has the relationship between money and happiness, how has that relationship evolved as you've accumulated wealth?
Yeah, well, that's a complicated question, but there's a lot of different threads to that. One is the whole thing about, does money buy you happiness? Money buys you the freedom to have options as to how you're going to spend your time. If you don't have it, you need someone who's going to give it to you. The more you have, the more you don't need anybody else to determine whether or not you can live in your house or pay for your kids' schools or whatever else. So happiness is actually not related. Now, is freedom a nice precondition for happiness? A lot of times, right? But there's periods of time where I took off from work, had a lot of freedom, bored out of my mind, less happy than when I was pulling an all-nighter. So how does it correlate? Not that directly, right? So naively, especially when you're young, you think, well, if I had that, I'd have the ability to be happy. Well, depends, right? So your happiness, I actually think, especially in a capitalist society like America, your happiness is derived from a lot of different threads: social, professional, personal, family of origin, whatever that may be, loneliness or not loneliness, connections. I think it's this complicated, multivariate equation that you're managing throughout your life, and having money doesn't hurt, but it is not sufficient. I never worked for money, though, right? Coming out of college, I had a weird situation where I kind of had to work for this company that helped me pay for school. Clever guy, put some golden handcuffs on me, ended up going back to Wisconsin even though I didn't want to, ended up in a direct marketing agency, ended up a few months later spinning that out into a startup. Doing that was about doing that. It wasn't about the money. Right? I was making $32,000, which I guess at the time was okay money, especially in Wisconsin standards, but it wasn't about that. It was about doing the thing. And then I came to Ogilvy in LA, was paid better, had a mid-level job, continued to get promoted. Actually, quite honestly, it was the promotion, the responsibility, and what we were doing that lit my hair on fire. Eventually was sort of running the LA office for Ogilvy Mather Direct when we had to resign a bunch of business to get IBM. And then I ended up going to Microsoft, took a huge pay cut. Huge pay cut. But it just made sense. Like I just needed to have enough to be able to go it because I get to work at Microsoft and there was this optionality on stock options and other things. But then I just put my head down and worked hard. Company did well. I do well. Ended up leading to Apple. So there are these stages in time where, for me, interestingly enough, the entrepreneurial stuff was more about experience or giving back, and the corporate stuff with an entrepreneurial mindset did more for my bank account. Mm-hmm. Just my personal situation, right? So I have not had the start a company and that company creates a nest egg. I had start a company, got a huge, incredible experience that got me another job, or left Apple and started a couple mental health agencies that are changing people's lives. I didn't get anything from that financially, but I got a lot, karmically, or from gratification. Eventually taught at USC, loved inspiring the next generation, et cetera, et cetera. Pay was ridiculous. I mean, no offense. I mean, it's just like, it was dumb. It didn't make any sense, right, per hour. Like if you do the per hour, especially because I'm a perfectionist, it's like $4 or whatever it was. But that's not why I was doing it.
Right.
And so again, I think the issue of happiness and work-life balance and what does money do for you, it gives you options, but you're not just collecting money. One of the things that drives me crazy is there's some subcultures, and I'm connected to a few of them, where money is the topic or it's the goal. It drives me crazy. Money is derived from the goal. For me, the goal is purpose-driven accomplishment and achievement, whatever that means to you. That could be the fact that you're proud of your children. It could be the fact that you help avoid someone from ending their life. It could be the fact that you enjoy lighting people's life up by putting 1,000 songs in their pocket, right? Mm-hmm. That gratification for me personally is the greatest. And I actually think it's the most highly correlated with outsized returns, personally, right? Because if you do that, someone's probably making money and they recognize that you're helping and they share it with you. Mm-hmm. That's pretty abstract. But with the full lens of my career, that's the consistent thing, right? Mission-aligned companies, bust my butt, do great work, be rewarded, sometimes outsized, sometimes purely not financial, sometimes just skills, right? One of the things that you look at the course of a career is like, how did I get that job? I got that job by doing this job that paid terribly, but it paid me in skills. Like I went to an advertising agency sort of as a certain level. Had I graduated from school and gone to the agency business, I never would have done it. Because in my day, they would have taken a college grad and put him in the mailroom. There's not even a mailroom anymore, but they would have put him there. And it would take me years to work up. I came in and said, I'm a database marketing expert. Because I had this job with this weird guy in Wisconsin, and I was doing it, so clearly I'm capable. Right? That job turned out, even though it was a cool startup, a great story, I left soon enough. I didn't get the financial rewards, but I did get the credibility and the skill set to get this job. Mm-hmm. And entrepreneurship is similar, right? You bring resources from other places, and that positions you to be the person that in this moment of time can solve the problem.
As we sort of run out of time here, unfortunately, do you have any sort of last message or advice you have to the next generation of entrepreneurs as they wrap up listening to this podcast and are excited to take action? Any sort of last message you'd leave them with? Well,
I got a couple. One is vote. 'Tis the season, so I'm going to deliver that message. As Obama said last night, don't boo, vote. Take responsibility wherever you are on the spectrum. Vote. Don't expect other people to do that job. Second is put your damn phone down. Drives me crazy. Don't use your iPad to entertain your children. Get them some crayons at the restaurant. If you're having a conversation with your date, you don't need your phone. I'm guilty. I'm working on it. It's hard. But for the sake of your happiness, that's probably more correlated than the amount of dollars that you earned at your current job. But then my real answer is, with respect to entrepreneurship, just do it, but don't just do it for the money. Picking up the same theme, I do believe just do it. Do it, especially when you're younger. Get the experience, because it is a skill base. Even if it doesn't work, you're going to develop a lot of useful skills, because again, it's a mindset, it's a muscle. Even if you end up at Google, having some experience doing something on the side is a wonderful learning experience. But do not do it because you want the money. That works for a very small number of people. But it's not going to work if the formula is you're trying to build skills, you're trying to build satisfaction, and hopefully there's this cherry on top, which is some cash, because it's hard. So definitely take action. Don't sit on the sidelines, but do not be motivated by the money. Be motivated by the mission and the problem.
Rob, thank you. That's been great. And I appreciate the kind of social advice there as well. I strongly agree with those
yeah,
two.
I can't help from being a parent, so I apologize.
But again, I appreciate your time. This has been great, and thanks for coming on the show.
Yeah, my pleasure. Good luck.